Hello, I'm Suzanne James. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land on which we live and work and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge all people of diversity in its many forms and champion their right to self-determination. We'll be joined today by Dr. Amanda Cohn. Amanda is a New South Wales Greens Upper House MP who is currently fighting against an awful bill introduced last week by Liberal MLC Susan Carter. It's known as the Voluntary Assisted Dying Residential Facilities Bill, which seeks to amend New South Wales hard-won VAD laws to allow religious-based institutions to refuse that care to elderly, sick, terminally ill residents who have been medically and legally approved to use voluntary assisted dying in their own homes in residential aged care. Many people are horrified at the intent and the content of this bill, and to talk to us a bit more about that, Dr. Cohn joins us now from Sydney. Amanda, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as I said, VAD became legal in New South Wales in 2022 and is up for its standard legislative review next year. Now, Go Gentle and the Older Persons Advocacy Network released a report back in September that found 85% of residential aged care facilities neither supported nor provided any information about voluntary assisted dying to its residents. Here in New South Wales, the legislation is also due shortly for its mandatory 3-year legislative review, which presumably would have been the appropriate time to raise any changes people wanted to look at. So why did Liberal MLC Susan Carter put this residential facilities bill up now on behalf of what are largely privatised yet still significantly government-funded aged care facilities? Are they trying to inappropriately preempt the normal VAD legislative review process, which they were so concerned to have written in when the legislation was first passed?
You're asking a very good question here about the timing, because these laws are so new in New South Wales. So as you said, the laws passed in 2022, and that was so hard fought by so many advocates. They only actually came into effect in November 2023. So it's very new for these laws in New South Wales. And what we've seen in other jurisdictions like Victoria is over time, as once we see how these laws are working in practice, it's really important to have that review process with full consultation with all the relevant stakeholders to work out if any tweaks are required. And what we've now seen with this bill is it's very narrow in terms of the change that it makes, but it hasn't gone through that kind of process where you would actually involve all of the relevant people and all of the relevant stakeholders to have their say on it. So it's caught a lot of people by surprise who are expecting to be part of this statewide conversation through the proper process next month, that we're now all of a sudden debating this part of it. And I suppose there's a whole variety of different conspiracy theories about the timing in terms of the politics of it and what it means for the major parties. But it's difficult to justify knowing that there is this proper process coming literally in the coming months.
Now, this bill is known as the Voluntary Assisted Dying Residential Facilities Bill 2025. It is not part of the current VAD legislation. The intent of this bill hinges on the premise that an institution can have a conscience and wants the institution or business unit to be able to conscientiously object to a resident's personal and private participation in VAD. Even though individuals within aged care organisations are already protected by conscientious objection clauses from, as individuals, having to participate. I'd also like to point out that allowing residents access to VAD in no way makes the facility responsible for either the process or its administration. That is all still done standalone by New South Wales Health VAD Navigator Services and the person's GP, regardless of the person's address. Now, we also saw on Monday that Go Gentle released legal advice they received from various senior counsel to the effect that this law is outright unconstitutional and also in contravention of the new Aged Care Act federally. So have you seen legal advice in relation to this bill, and is that what it says?
I have seen this legal advice, and what it says is that the Commonwealth Aged Care Act and aged care rules guarantee the right of a person to have their needs, goals, and preferences for end-of-life care be recognised and be addressed by aged care service providers, and that includes voluntary assisted dying. So, there is very senior legal advice that now says this bill is constitutionally invalid, which, really means we shouldn't be debating it seriously. But what I think the bill has fundamentally misunderstood here is that residential aged care facilities are someone's home. It's not just a business or an organisation. This is attempting to restrict someone's access to legal health care in their own home. And so this idea that it's just simply aligning the legislation so that residential aged care facilities are treating the same thing as hospitals, I think really underplays the seriousness of that proposal.
Susan Carter's residential facilities bill hinges on two changes that they're seeking to the VAD Act. The first would allow them to forcibly block New South Wales health-approved VAD practitioners from attending, and the second half allows them to transfer at every stage of the quite onerous VAD application and completion process to somewhere else in order to even have the basic consultations in relation to VAD. There are many issues with this, not least of all the fact that it would in practicality require a sick, terminally ill, frail, elderly people to undertake transfers out of their own home at every single phase of the process. So what are the main issues you see with this? And again, what justifications are being used for subjecting them to such terrible treatment?
So in the debate in Parliament, she actually used the word simply in talking about transferring someone to access voluntary assisted dying. And I think it's really important to understand what we're actually talking about in practice. We're talking about people who are terminally ill, who are frail, where you can't just hop in a car to go to an appointment, where a transfer might be painful, might actually be medically harmful. We're talking about people getting collected in an ambulance. I've heard from an individual who needs to be moved using a hoist system. So there's a real complexity and cruelty here. But also the voluntary assisted dying process isn't just one appointment. There's a really complex process people have to go through in terms of their assessment and their consent. This can be up to 7 different appointments, as well as the actual administration of voluntary assisted dying if people choose to go ahead with it. So this idea of just simply transferring people, we're talking about taking someone right at the end of their life out of their own home, either to die in hospital, which is something that they don't want, or in some cases actually outside of the town that they live in altogether. And there's at least 20 towns in New South Wales where there is only one residential aged care facility that's run by a faith-based provider. And this cruelty of taking someone away from their family and their community at the end of their life, it totally goes against the principles of what the voluntary assisted dying laws that came in 2022 sought to give people in terms of that autonomy and that dignity at the end of their lives.
My second point was going to be, which you just very eloquently covered, that they want this person to be transferred out for every single part of the process. Now, I live in the Riverina, which is a regional area, and when my late partner first required aged care services, the only 2 options we had in town were both owned by the Catholic Church. We also had significant issues with things like medical transfer. He suffered 2 bouts of cancer, was a paraplegic from muscular dystrophy, and also at one point required a toe amputation because of the complications from his various conditions. And I can tell you that transferring any patient that has even a mild disability or a mobility problem, or who is particularly unwell and frail, is very, very difficult to do, and it is never anything other than damaging to the patient, not only physically, but emotionally as well. It sucks the life out of them, and it is a terrible thing to ask someone who is terminally ill to have to do, even once, let alone on a regular basis, just so some institution can have a conscience about legal healthcare that they're trying to access.
I would agree with that. I think there really hasn't been proper consideration of what this means for people on the ground. We talked about some of the practicalities of what a transfer really means for people, but the other thing is that aged care is just not a choice for so many people. This idea that everybody who chooses to live in a faith-based aged care facility is part of that faith-based community is just not true. I mean, all of these towns where there's only one facility, we know that there are thousands of people admitted to hospitals across New South Wales who can't be discharged because they can't access an aged care bed. There's lots of people who end up in the only aged care facility that they can actually find to live in based on their care needs. So I think for anyone, for themselves or for a loved one who's gone through that process of finding aged care, this idea that there's a whole lot of choice involved is just really out of touch. So the justifications that have been put forward are this idea of religious freedom for the organisation and for the staff. And I think it's important to recognise, as you've pointed out, the laws already provide conscientious objection for individuals. So for staff who work at an aged care facility, they can choose not to take part in voluntary assisted dying. But the law, as it currently stands, really importantly, doesn't stop a conscientious objector from blocking someone's access altogether in their own home. So this idea that people's religious beliefs or religious freedoms should actually extend to controlling other people's access is quite extraordinary and unsurprising from some of the members of parliament who are supporting it. And I think there's also this argument that it's just, we're just simply aligning aged care with hospitals. We'll just simply transfer people. There's been this real underplaying of the significance of what is being proposed. The proponent of the bill has said that she's not trying to restrict access to voluntary assisted dying in New South Wales, but it's very clear that the result of this bill passing would be restricting access to a huge number of people.
I'd like to ask you now about community concern, the level of community concern you're seeing about this bill. I'd also like to bear in mind that both Christians supporting choice for voluntary assisted dying and The Guardian have both confirmed that the vast majority of people who are Christians, including Catholics, support the individual's right to choose voluntary assisted dying, even if they don't necessarily believe in it for themselves or their families. The Church has been very good at sowing division on this during all of the debate. Has your office been contacted by people concerned about the intention of this bill, or are people generally still unaware of its actual contents?
My office has received thousands of emails about this bill. People living with terminal illness or chronic complex illness, or people who are living in residential aged care or who are caring for elderly relatives, are deeply concerned about what this bill means for their ability to make choices about end-of-life care. So I think for people who are interested in this issue, they are well aware that this is a terrifying bill that's proposing really significant reform. I think once people understand what it's proposing, they're understandably very upset about this, and it's probably had less public and media attention than you would expect just because it's moved so quickly through the parliament. It went really straight to debate shortly after being tabled, and we would normally expect to have far longer to consider a bill like this.
Amanda, you wrote to your constituents recently confirming that thankfully all the Greens will be voting against this dreadful bill. Also, Minister Rose Jackson said in her own speech in Parliament about it, on behalf of herself and the New South Wales Health Department, that she will be voting against it, and that is in accordance with the New South Wales Health Department's own advice. She also mentioned in her speech the abject cruelty of the bill and what it means in practical application. What's your reading of the level of support this bill does or does not have in the Upper House, and how important is it that people continue to contact the Upper House MP to express their concern about it?
It's so important for people to continue to contact Upper House MPs about this, and that's because this is a conscience vote for the Liberal Party and for the Labor Party. So it means that the numbers are a bit uncertain and difficult to gauge. There's obviously lots of conversations happening behind the scenes in the Parliament. Certainly for the Greens, this is a matter of health policy, not a matter of individual conscience. So all Greens will be voting against the bill as a matter of health policy. I think in particular, people who live in rural and regional communities, knowing the profound impact that this bill would have, that there's a risk that voluntary assisted dying might not be available in any residential aged care facility at all in the town. I mean, I would hope that that would be of interest to members of the National Party representing rural and regional communities. So we certainly need to hear from people who care about this issue. Debate could resume as early as Wednesday next week, but it's still not certain when the vote will happen.
Okay, so that's about the 12th November, yeah?
That's right.
So it's very important people continue to contact their upper house MPs. If you're unsure how to do that, you can go to any of the Go Gentle or Dying with Dignity websites or check their social media, and you will find links there to easily be able to contact your upper house MP and help us ensure this bill never sees the light of day. Amanda Cohn, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time, and I hope we can speak again once this outrageous bill has finally been defeated.
Thanks so much for your interest in the issue. I really appreciate it.
I'm Suzanne James. Thank you for joining us.